I didn't cry when the heavy stack of inventory reports hit my chest in the middle of a crowded hallway. I didn't even flinch when my boss screamed that $2 million in hardware was missing and it was my fault. I had been working for 14 hours straight. I just wanted my lunch. But when I dragged my exhausted body into the break room, a random maintenance guy was calmly eating my only homemade meal. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank all of you for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely no budget to continue operating here. Because of this, we are forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform in the near future and will be moving our operations entirely over to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better and significantly longer. Our Patreon features highly detailed situations that we simply cannot publish on YouTube, complete with multiple emotional voice actors bringing each story to life. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the link provided in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive right into today's intense corporate revenge story. The air inside the Aetherist Dynamics building was strictly climate-controlled, yet I constantly felt like I was suffocating. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, maddening frequency that drilled directly into my skull. At 31 years old, being a logistics coordinator at a massive hardware technology corporation in Seattle was supposed to be a career milestone. Instead, it was a waking nightmare of impossible deadlines and toxic management. My physical and mental exhaustion had reached a point where my bones physically ached with every step I took. I was running on empty, fueled only by stale coffee and the desperate need to pay my rent. My absolute breaking point arrived without warning in the middle of a crowded central corridor. I was carrying a heavy stack of physical inventory files when my direct manager, Marcus, stormed toward me. Marcus was a terrible human being who wore aggressively expensive suits and thick cologne to mask the rot of his own incompetence. Without slowing down, he forcefully slammed the thick stack of faulty hardware reports directly into my chest. The sharp plastic edges of the binders dug painfully into my collarbone, and documents cascaded across the polished floor. $2 million in proprietary materials are missing, and you expect me to cover your tracks, Marcus screamed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. The entire hallway froze. Software engineers, marketing associates, and junior executives stopped in their tracks. Nobody stepped forward to help. They just watched me burn. "You are the logistics coordinator," he bellowed, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "You signed off on those warehouse transfers. This massive deficit is entirely your fault, and you are going to take full responsibility for it." I could not even form the words to defend myself. My throat felt like it was coated in dry ash. I had been working 14 hours a day trying to untangle the chaotic supply chain mess he had personally created, gathering the scattered papers with trembling hands. I did not argue. I just needed to escape the staring eyes. I needed to breathe. More than anything, I just wanted to eat my lunch. I practically fled to the cramped, windowless employee break room on the lower level. It smelled of burnt popcorn and sheer corporate despair. I had spent nearly an hour the night before preparing a proper homemade meal. It was the absolute only good thing I had left in my day. I pushed the heavy door open, desperately craving 10 minutes of absolute silence. Instead, I found a stranger. Sitting at the small laminate table was a man wearing the faded, heavy canvas uniform of the warehouse maintenance crew, and right in front of him, fully opened, was my container. He was calmly, methodically eating my only homemade lunch. Under normal circumstances, I would have yelled. I would have demanded to know what on earth he was doing stealing my food. But standing there, listening to the monotonous hum of the old refrigerator, the exhaustion swallowed my anger whole. The sheer absurdity of the moment broke whatever spirit I had left. The physical toll of the corporate grind was so heavy that my rage simply short-circuited. I dropped the wrinkled inventory files onto a nearby chair and let out a dry, bitter laugh. I walked over to the water cooler, filled a small paper cup with cold water, and walked over to the table. I pushed the glass of water directly toward him. "Go ahead and finish it," I said, my voice hollow and devoid of any sarcasm. "I genuinely hope you have a much better day than I am having." The man in the maintenance uniform stopped chewing. He offered absolutely no apology. He did not look embarrassed. He just slowly lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were razor-sharp, calculating, and piercingly intelligent. He stared intently at the plastic name tag that was trembling against my chest, his gaze assessing me with a cold intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Before that heavy silence could stretch any further, the break room door was violently thrown open. It slammed against the wall with a loud crack, and Marcus marched into the room. He took one look at the man in the maintenance uniform and curled his lip in absolute disgust, completely ignoring the worker's presence as he turned his venom entirely back onto me. "Did you seriously think you could just walk away from me?" Marcus hissed, stepping so close I had to lean back. "Let me make this perfectly clear to you. If that final inventory report does not have your signature on it by 5 o'clock this afternoon, you are not just fired. I will personally ensure you are criminally charged for the missing hardware. You are going to take the fall for this." He sneered at me one last time, turned around, and stormed out, leaving the door wide open. The threat hung heavily in the stale air. I was completely shattered. The humiliation was absolute. I could not bear to stay in that room for one single second longer. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and walked out into the cold hallway, leaving my ruined lunch and the silent maintenance man behind. I walked away in total defeat, completely unaware of what was happening behind my back. Sitting quietly at the table, the worker reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, highly encrypted smartphone. He opened the camera application and quickly snapped a clear photograph of the half-eaten lunch container. Then, he zoomed in perfectly, capturing a high-resolution image of my employee identification number printed on the documents I had left behind. My desk on the 42nd floor felt like a glass cage. The moment I sat down, my monitor violently flashed with an incoming priority notification. It was the finalized inventory reconciliation report from Marcus. My hands were still shaking from the break room encounter, but instinct forced my eyes to scan the digital columns. At first glance, it looked like standard logistical data, but as I scrolled down to the high-value proprietary components section, the cold reality of his trap became terrifyingly clear. The figures had been meticulously and maliciously altered. Shipments of rare earth microprocessors and aerospace-grade titanium housings, items that cost tens of thousands of dollars each, had their batch numbers subtly shifted. A ledger that was supposed to show an intake of 4,000 units now falsely displayed only 400. The deficit was staggering. If I applied my cryptographic digital signature to the bottom of this file, I would be legally verifying that I had personally overseen the disposal of the missing assets. The digital trail would definitively frame me for the embezzlement of over $2 million in corporate property. Marcus was not just firing me, he was actively sending me to federal prison. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in the back of my throat. I immediately moved my mouse to reject the document and open the main team communication channel. I needed to alert the internal compliance department. I typed out a frantic message to the senior auditor, but the moment I hit the enter key, the screen froze. A small gray dialog box popped up. It read, "Access revoked by administrator." I clicked the application icon again. Nothing happened. I tried to open the corporate email directory. Permission denied. I looked frantically around the open plan office. Dozens of my coworkers were typing away. Completely oblivious, Marcus had remotely severed all my digital connections. He had systematically cut my virtual vocal cords, turning me into a ghost within my own department. I was completely isolated, trapped in a digital quarantine with a ticking time bomb waiting for my signature. I rested my heavy head in my hands, trying to suppress a severe panic attack. As I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes, my fingers brushed against the edge of my mechanical keyboard. It shifted slightly, revealing a small violently crumpled yellow sticky note hidden underneath the plastic frame. I pulled it out, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. There were exactly 8 words written on the paper in thick, heavily pigmented black ink. Stall for time. Do not use electronic ink. I stared at the harsh, uneven strokes, the sharp, chemical smell of industrial solvent wafted off the paper. It was not written with a standard office pen. It was written with a specialized, heavy-duty oil marker used exclusively on the concrete floors and metal crates down in the logistics center. My mind instantly flashed back to the cramped break room just 15 minutes ago. The maintenance worker who had eaten my lunch, clipped to the breast pocket of his faded canvas shirt, was that exact type of heavy-duty warehouse marker. My pulse pounded violently against my eardrums. I had no idea who that man truly was, or how he had managed to slip this note onto my desk undetected. But the message was a lifeline thrown into a drowning pool. I chose to trust the absolute stranger over the boss who was actively trying to destroy my life. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the synthetic carpet. I bypassed my locked computer and marched straight into Marcus's office without knocking. He looked up from his leather chair, a sickeningly confident smirk plastered across his face. "I cannot digitally sign the document," I said, keeping my voice as flat and emotionless as possible to hide my absolute terror. "My internal portal just crashed and threw a fatal error code. I am locked out of the approval system." Marcus slammed his fist on the desk. "Stop playing games with me. Clara, you have less than 2 hours to approve that file." "I am not playing games," I replied, standing my ground. "If you want this finalized before 5 o'clock, you need to print the hard copy right now. I have to take the physical document down to the subterranean holding facility to run a manual verification against the barcodes. Standard operating procedure requires a physical audit if the digital system fails." He glared at me, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither of us breathed. Then, he aggressively clicked his mouse. The heavy laser printer in the corner of his office hummed to life, spitting out the heavily doctored report. He snatched the warm pages, slammed them onto his desk, and shoved a sleek silver pen toward my chest. "Take it," Marcus ordered, his voice dripping with venom. "Go down there, verify your fake numbers, and sign the damn paper. If you are not back here by 4:30, I am calling corporate security to escort you off the premises." I ignored his pen, snatched the printed pages, and walked out of his office. I did not head towards the polished glass passenger elevators in the main lobby. Instead, I navigated through the back corridors until I reached the heavy, reinforced steel doors of the industrial freight elevator. I pressed the call button. The massive gears ground together, and the cavernous metal box arrived with a heavy thud. I stepped inside the dimly lit cabin, the scent of machine grease and ozone filling my lungs, as the heavy steel doors violently slid shut, sealing me inside. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was plunging straight into the dark underbelly of the corporation, blindly throwing myself into a high-stakes gamble without knowing a single rule of the game. The massive steel doors of the freight elevator ground opened with a deafening metallic shriek, revealing the cavernous subterranean level of etherous dynamics. The air down here was vastly different from the sterile, climate-controlled chill of the corporate floors above. It was heavy, thick with the scent of burning ozone, damp cardboard, and raw machine exhaust. Row upon row of towering metal storage racks stretched endlessly into the gloomy distance, disappearing into the shadows like the colossal ribs of some dead, mechanical beast. The only sound was the rhythmic, vibrating hum of the massive server cooling units echoing against the concrete walls. Standing directly beneath a flickering halogen bulb, leaning casually against the bright yellow roll cage of an industrial forklift, was the man from the break room, the stranger who had eaten my lunch. He had not followed me down in the elevator. He had been waiting for me. I clutched Marcus's doctored inventory report tightly to my chest, my knuckles turning entirely white. The man pushed himself off the heavy machinery and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. He offered absolutely no polite introduction. He did not bother explaining how he knew I would come down to this exact location. He just locked his piercing eyes onto mine and asked a single, razor-sharp question. Do you want to keep your job, or do you want to tear this rotten system to the absolute ground? I stood frozen, the sheer audacity of his words cutting through my panic. Before I could even formulate a response, he gestured with his head, signaling me to follow him. We moved silently through the labyrinth of high-value storage, bypassing the main logistics hubs. He led me to the far eastern wall, stopping in front of a massive chain-link enclosure that was supposedly condemned for structural repairs. Look closely at the security seals on those crates, he instructed, his voice low and commanding, devoid of any working-class deference. I stepped closer to the wire mesh and squinted in the dim light. The heavy red plastic security tags on the metal transit boxes were technically unbroken. But looking at the microscopic edges, I saw the warped plastic. They had been cleanly severed, melted, and meticulously reattached using an industrial heat gun. Marcus is not just misplacing your hardware due to sheer incompetence, the man continued, his tone turning dangerously cold. He is actively siphoning pristine, next-generation prototype microprocessors right out the back loading dock. He alters the intake ledger on the main server to match the deficit, flags the missing units as defective during transit, and sells the ghost inventory to a ruthless black market hardware broker based in Eastern Europe. The horrifying puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind. The millions of dollars in missing components were not a clerical error. It was a highly organized heist, and Marcus was building a paper trail to make me the sole architect of the crime. Here is the play, the man said, pulling a crisp, neatly folded document from the deep pocket of his canvas maintenance jacket. You are going to walk right back up to the 40th floor. You are going to look Marcus straight in the eye, act completely defeated, and tell him you manually verified his numbers. When he demands your signature to finalize the theft, you will smoothly swap his doctored final page with this one. I stared at the paper in his rough hands, my paranoia aggressively spiking. The adrenaline in my veins turned into pure defensive rage. Are you completely out of your mind? I hissed, taking a sharp step back away from him. Why in the world would I ever trust you? You are a maintenance worker who stole my lunch barely an hour ago, for all I know. You are the actual guy running the loading dock smuggling ring. And you just need a desperate, naive logistics coordinator to act as your human meat shield when the federal investigators finally show up. He did not flinch at my accusation. He did not raise his voice to defend himself. Instead, his expression turned entirely to ice, and he began to speak with a terrifying, mechanical precision. On the 14th of October, Marcus authorized a blind wire transfer of $280,000 to a shell corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands. Exactly 3 weeks later, on the 5th of November, another transfer cleared for $115,000. Both transactions completely bypassed the internal financial auditing software using a legacy backdoor coded into the old procurement system. Furthermore, he purchased a luxury waterfront property under his wife's maiden name exactly 6 days ago. I stopped breathing. The cavernous warehouse suddenly felt suffocatingly small. The sheer volume of highly classified, heavily restricted financial data flowing effortlessly from his mouth was staggering. A guy who swept the concrete floors and changed the halogen bulbs could not possibly possess the encrypted routing numbers of a senior executive's offshore bank accounts. The man standing in front of me was not a janitor. He was something entirely different, something incredibly dangerous. I had absolutely no idea who he truly was, but in that dark, echoing basement, surrounded by the physical evidence of my own framing, I realized he was the absolute only weapon I had left. I reached out and snatched the replacement document from his hand, sliding it flat against the clipboard underneath Marcus's forged papers. Without saying another word to the stranger, I pulled my smartphone from my cardigan pocket. I navigated directly to the voice memo application, tapped the red circular button to begin recording, and locked the screen. I slipped the device into my breast pocket, making absolutely sure the microphone was exposed to the open air. I turned my back off the man in the canvas jacket, walked directly into the waiting freight elevator, and hit the heavy button for the 40th floor. The doors slammed shut, sealing my fate. I was walking straight back into the tiger's den. The heavy steel doors of the freight elevator ground open, releasing me back into the sterile, freezing air of the 40th floor. My heart was hammering relentlessly against my ribs, but I forced my breathing into a slow, measured rhythm. The smartphone hidden deep inside my breast pocket was silently recording every single sound. I gripped the wooden clipboard tightly against my chest, making absolutely sure the forged replacement document the mysterious stranger had handed me was perfectly aligned beneath the official cover sheet. I walked slowly into Marcus's corner office, deliberately dropping my shoulders and averting my eyes to project an aura of absolute crushing defeat. He was sitting comfortably behind his massive mahogany desk, casually sipping from a freshly brewed cup of black coffee. Thin ribbons of steam curled into the cold, air-conditioned air. I verified the physical warehouse counts. I lied, allowing my voice to shake just enough to sound entirely broken and authentic. The physical inventory matches your digital report. Just let me sign this paperwork so I can collect my final month of salary and go home. Marcus smiled, a sickening, terrifying display of arrogant triumph. He pushed a sleek silver fountain pen across the polished wood of his desk. I reached out and picked it up, feeling the heavy cold metal barrel against my sweating skin. I pressed the sharp tip of the pen to the bottom line of the paper. Before the wet ink could even begin to bleed into the paper fibers, the office door was violently thrown open. A senior compliance auditor, a notoriously ruthless corporate enforcer who acted as Marcus's personal attack dog, stormed into the room without a single word of warning. The auditor reached out and aggressively ripped the clipboard right out from under my trembling hand. "You are hereby suspended from all duties at Aetherist Dynamics, effective immediately," the auditor declared, his voice booming with artificial authority, loud enough for the entire outer office bullpen to hear. "We have just uncovered undeniable, time-stamped digital evidence of gross financial embezzlement tied directly to your personal login credentials." My stomach instantly plummeted into a bottomless abyss. I looked over at Marcus. He was no longer just smiling. He was practically glowing with malicious, predatory joy. The horrifying truth hit me with the destructive force of a speeding freight train. Marcus was never planning to use my signature as a safety net for some distant, future corporate audit. He was actively framing me right here, right now, on this exact afternoon. By the time I fully realized what was happening, his massive, illegal shipment of black market hardware was probably already being loaded onto an untraceable transport truck down in the loading bay. He desperately needed a spectacular, noisy distraction, and my immediate public arrest was the perfect smokescreen to cover his tracks. A sudden, loud commotion outside the transparent glass walls of the executive suite violently snapped my attention away. I turned my head and watched in absolute paralyzing horror as the main elevator bank on our floor chimed in perfect unison. The polished steel doors slid open simultaneously, revealing over a dozen stern-looking men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers emblazoned with the bold white letters of the Federal Economic Crimes Division. They completely bypassed the plush executive suites. The lead investigator held up a freshly signed search warrant and pointed his finger directly toward my small, cluttered cubicle in the logistics department. The breathable air in the room was completely sucked out. I was totally cornered in a trap I did not see coming. I was going to be led out of the corporate headquarters in metal handcuffs in front of hundreds of staring colleagues. Amidst the overwhelming, deafening chaos of the federal agents shouting orders, the smartphone concealed in my pocket delivered a sharp, rhythmic vibration against my collarbone. It was a terrifying, insane risk to break character, but pure, unfiltered desperation drove my hand. I pulled the device out, pretending to frantically search for my union representative's contact information. The bright screen illuminated with a single, unlisted text message from an unknown sender. "Activate code 884 on his computer right now." I had absolutely no time to weigh the legal consequences of what I was about to do. The federal agents were forcefully moving through the rows of desks outside, shouting commands and violently securing my personal belongings in plastic evidence bags. The senior auditor was busy loudly reading me my corporate termination rights, his face flushed with arrogant self-importance. Marcus was thoroughly enjoying the theatrical show, leaning far back in his expensive leather chair, completely relaxed and entirely off his guard. Most importantly, his primary computer monitor was wide open, logged directly into the master administrator dashboard without a screensaver. Adrenaline, pure and unadulterated, flooded my nervous system. I did not think. I simply reacted with the raw, chaotic survival instinct of a cornered animal fighting for its life. I lashed out with my left hand, striking the heavy ceramic coffee mug on Marcus's desk with every single ounce of physical force I could muster. The heavy mug launched off the edge of the mahogany surface and shattered violently against the senior auditor's thigh. Boiling hot, black coffee soaked instantly through his expensive tailored trousers. The auditor let out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek, dropping the stolen clipboard to the floor and grabbing his burned leg in sheer, blinding panic. Marcus jumped out of his chair in shock, cursing loudly as the scalding liquid violently splashed across his polished Italian leather shoes. I ruthlessly weaponized their 3 seconds of absolute, blinding distraction. I lunged my entire body across the wide expanse of the mahogany desk, my ribs painfully slamming into the hard wooden edge. I reached Marcus's mechanical keyboard, my shaking fingers flying across the keys with frantic, desperate precision. 8, 8, 4, enter. I had absolutely no idea what the numerical command meant, but the exact millisecond my finger struck the return key, the physical atmosphere of the entire floor violently shifted. The bright fluorescent overhead lights instantly snapped off. We were plunged into total darkness for a terrifying fraction of a second before the space was suddenly illuminated by a pulsating, aggressive red emergency glare. A deafening, heavy mechanical boom echoed through the internal architecture of the skyscraper. Every single reinforced smart glass security door on the 40th floor, the main lobby entrances, the emergency stairwells, and the executive suites slammed shut simultaneously. The heavy magnetic locks engaged with a terrifyingly final, echoing click. The federal agents out in the bullpen stopped dead in their tracks, violently pulling at the thick metal handles. But the reinforced glass refused to budge even a single millimeter. The auditor entirely forgot his burned leg, staring wildly at the flashing red servers. Marcus scrambled frantically toward the door of his office, pushing his full body weight against the glass. But he was completely trapped. The central server system was totally locked down from the outside. No one was getting in, and infinitely more importantly, absolutely no one was getting out. We were all trapped together in a sealed cage of glowing red glass, and the rules of this twisted corporate game had just been completely rewritten. The piercing red glare of the emergency lights bathed the 40th floor in a bloody, pulsating hue. Then, the frantic flashing stabilized into a solid, heavy crimson glow. Instead of the chaotic wail of standard fire alarms, the high-fidelity public address speakers concealed within the ceiling panels cracked to life. An emotionless, automated female voice resonated through the entire building. Attention! Executive override protocol initiated. All senior management personnel are mandated to assemble in the primary glass conference room immediately. Total lockdown is in effect. Through the transparent walls of the executive suite, I could see the Federal Economic Police aggressively pounding their fists against the reinforced elevator lobby doors. Their search warrants and badges were completely useless against military-grade smart glass, driven by the master security override. The elevators were permanently disabled. The stairwell accesses were magnetically fused. The central server had effectively created a suffocating, impenetrable vacuum, freezing time and trapping us in a deadly holding pattern on the executive level. The authorities were completely blocked out, creating a terrifying dead zone where the normal rules of law were temporarily suspended. Marcus completely lost whatever remained of his polished corporate composure. his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged forward, his heavy hands clamping down on my right wrist like a vice. His fingernails dug painfully into my skin as he violently yanked me forward, intending to drag me out of his office and into the central boardroom. He was going to use me as a literal hostage, intending to parade me in front of the other executives as the rogue, unstable employee who had just triggered a catastrophic cyber attack to cover up her own embezzlement. I stumbled behind him as he forcefully marched us down the crimson-lit corridor. He kicked open the heavy door to the primary glass conference room, throwing me roughly toward the center of the room. But as he turned to shout his fabricated accusations at the other terrified directors, slowly trickling into the space, the words completely died in his throat. Every single massive display lining the boardroom walls, screens normally reserved for quarterly profit projections and global market analysis, had been hijacked. They were all broadcasting a synchronized, high-definition live feed from the subterranean loading dock. The grainy night vision cameras revealed a catastrophic failure of Marcus's master plan, the massive, unmarked 18-wheeler truck, the vehicle secretly scheduled to transport millions of dollars in stolen rare earth microprocessors to the black market, was not moving. It was completely boxed in. 4 matte black armored tactical vehicles had aggressively rammed into the loading bay, pinning the transport truck against the solid concrete retaining wall. Dozens of heavily armed operatives, wearing the insignia of Aethirus Dynamics' private elite security division, had surrounded the vehicle. They had the smuggling crew pinned face down on the cold asphalt under the blinding glare of high-intensity floodlights. Marcus stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing in silent, paralyzed horror. His massive, highly coordinated empire of theft was crumbling in real time, broadcasted in glorious 4,000-pixel resolution to the entire executive board. In that exact moment, staring at the sheer, beautiful devastation on his face, the paralyzing terror that had gripped my chest for the last 14 hours, completely vanished. The frantic, cornered animal inside me died, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. I slowly stood up straight, brushing the wrinkles out of my cardigan. I reached up to my chest, unclipped the cheap plastic name tag that had defined my miserable existence at this company, and tossed it callously onto the center of the massive obsidian conference table. It landed with a sharp, plastic clatter that echoed loudly in the totally silent room. Marcus slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with desperate confusion and rapidly rising dread. "Those altered inventory files you tried to force me to authorize," I said, my voice cutting through the dead air with lethal, calculated precision. "They never touched the local internal network. The terminal command I just executed bypassed your local administrative privileges entirely. Every single forged document, every altered digital ledger, and the live audio recording of you trying to frame me in your office was just transmitted through an encrypted tunnel directly into the board of directors' secure offshore cloud server. You are completely exposed, Marcus." Before he could even process the magnitude of his absolute destruction, the heavy magnetic locks on the primary conference room doors disengaged with a loud, authoritative clack. The frosted smart glass instantly turned completely transparent, and the massive doors slid open. The maintenance worker from the basement break room stepped into the boardroom. However, the faded canvas jacket and heavy work boots were entirely gone. He was impeccably dressed in a flawless, hand-cut, charcoal gray bespoke suit that radiated immense wealth and absolute authority. His posture was perfectly rigid, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the commanding presence of an apex predator inspecting his conquered territory. Flanking him in perfect, intimidating synchronization were 2 severe-looking corporate litigators carrying thick leather briefcases. The trap was fully sprung, and the true architect of this total systemic purge had finally arrived to claim his domain. The man walked with absolute purpose toward the head of the massive obsidian table, a seat that had remained entirely vacant for a very long time. He reached for his left wrist, unclasped a cheap plastic digital watch he had been wearing with the maintenance uniform, and tossed it carelessly onto the polished glass surface. It clattered loudly, a stark contrast to the heavy silence gripping the room. He braced his hands on the edge of the table, leaning forward with the undeniable, crushing weight of absolute authority. For those of you whose memories have conveniently faded during my 12-month sabbatical, he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, I am Julian Hayes, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Etherius Dynamics. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled executives. Marcus physically collapsed, his knees buckling until he heavily hit the edge of a leather chair. His face turned the color of wet ash. Panic completely hijacked his vocal cords. Julian, sir, you have to listen to me, Marcus stammered, his words stumbling over each other in a desperate, pathetic rush. There has been a catastrophic system failure. This rogue logistics coordinator. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at me. She completely manipulated the subterranean data logs. She orchestrated this entire theft for her own financial gain. Julian did not even blink. He simply raised one hand, slicing through the air, and instantly silencing the entire room. The lawyer standing to his right stepped forward, dropping a massively thick dossier of printed digital forensics onto the table. Julian tapped the screen of a tablet. Suddenly, the crisp, undeniable audio recording I had secretly captured on my phone echoed through the high-fidelity speakers. Marcus's own voice filled the boardroom, arrogantly threatening me, forcing me to take the fall. The audio cut off sharply. Save your pathetic breath, Julian stated, his tone freezing the remaining oxygen in the room. We traced the corrupted network requests. Every single unauthorized outgoing shipment over the past 6 months was routed directly from your personal, encrypted IP address. We have the offshore routing numbers, the black market broker communications, and the exact coordinates of your new waterfront estate. Marcus opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. He was completely, utterly destroyed. Julian slowly turned his attention away from the ruined man and looked directly at me. His sharp expression softened just a fraction. The corporate rot in this division ran deeper than I ever imagined, Julian explained, addressing me but making sure the entire board heard every single word. I spent the last 2 weeks disguised in the basement because I needed to observe this operation without the executive filter. I needed to know if anyone in this building still possessed a shred of basic human decency. Eating your only meal was not an accident. Clara, it was a final, highly calculated stress test. I needed to see how you would treat someone you believed was far beneath you, especially when you were at your absolute lowest point, completely exhausted and pushed to the brink. You showed grace. You passed the humanity test. Marcus failed miserably. Julian gave a subtle nod toward the transparent glass walls. The security master lock instantly disengaged. The heavy doors slid open, and the federal economic agents finally flooded into the executive suite. They did not hesitate. They immediately swarmed Marcus and the weeping senior auditor, roughly spinning them around and tightly snapping heavy metal handcuffs onto their wrists. The entire office bullpen watched in absolute, stunned silence as the 2 men were humiliatingly marched out of the corporate headquarters in total disgrace. When the room finally cleared of the chaos, Julian walked over to where I was standing. He did not hand me a stack of human resources forms or a standard promotion letter. Instead, one of the lawyers stepped forward and handed Julian an elegant, insulated thermal bag. He unzipped it and placed a beautifully crafted, multi-tiered wooden bento box from a highly exclusive, 3-star Michelin restaurant gently onto the table in front of me. I owe you a meal, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly to every single executive who had ever looked down on me. And this company owes you a permanent seat on the executive board. Welcome to the C-suite, Clara. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to this incredible story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your location in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and exciting, I kindly remind you that our channel has been demonetized, meaning we absolutely will not be uploading any new videos here on YouTube in the foreseeable future. We are moving our entire operation to Patreon. Please help keep our community alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. Over there, you will hear the absolute best, fully voice-acted, exclusive true stories that are way too intense for us to publish publicly. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the description box and the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again for your endless support. And I cannot wait to see you all over on Patreon for our next massive revenge story.